Welcome, everyone. It's so good for the soul to see so many beloved members of community together here this afternoon. Welcome. I am Arlita Little, the Executive and Artistic Director of the Loft. At the Loft, we are committed to advancing the power of writers and readers to craft and share stories, to create and celebrate connections, and to build just and sustainable communities. And by sustainable, I mean life-sustaining communities. We are honored to be in partnership with More Than a Single Story for this incredible event, Building Minnesota's Powerful Arts Community, How We Got Here. I want to take a moment just to thank Loft members whose contributions made the Loft support of this program possible this afternoon. Like so many of the amazing, incredible artists, activists, leaders who are going to grace this stage this afternoon, we at the Loft really envision a world where the word, the power of the word, liberates minds, deepens relationships, and inspires movements for people and for planet. So I just want to take a moment to thank you all for choosing to be here. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our beloved Carolyn Holbrook of More Than a Single Story. Welcome.
Thank you, Arlita, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'm just going to say a couple of words about More Than a Single Story, and then we will begin our panel. More Than a Single Story started in 2016. It is a conversation where Black, Indigenous, and people of color, artists and arts activists discuss issues of importance to us. And our goal is to provide a forum that strengthens our abilities to work together around cross-cultural understanding and to add to the discussions of empowerment in our community. We are pleased with our ongoing partnerships with the Loft and several libraries around the Twin Cities, and some new and developing partnerships as well. And we're grateful to the voters of Minnesota for grants from the Metro Regional Arts Council and the Minnesota State Arts Board, and also support from other funders that keep our programs going, like the St. Paul Foundation, Murdag and Bigelow Foundation, and others. Thank you so much. And last year, we're in our 8th year now, and last year David Mura and I published an anthology called, it was up there a little while ago, We Are Meant to Rise. And his book and mine and the anthology are also for sale in the lobby once we're done. So the anthology sort of speaks to the issues that have been with us for the last couple of years in some very powerful ways. And I thank all of you who've read the book and for being here with us again today. So all of us here in the Twin Cities, we know that the Twin Cities is home to an amazing arts and cultural community, but many are not aware of what went into developing this community, perhaps especially with the arts in the BIPOC communities. And by the way, Chef Sean Sherman says for BIPOC, beautiful, intelligent people of color. I can handle that. I love that. So that's who we are. So I'm excited to hear and to share the stories of the trials and triumphs that went into building the community that we are all benefiting from today. And as I call their names, I'll come up to the platform and have a seat. Daniel Bergin. Juanita, okay. Yeah. Juanita Corbine Espinosa. she is right there. Okay. Kathryn Haddad. Alberto Justiniano. David Mura. And myself. And I'm also, I'm especially excited that Vickie Benson will be moderating today's panel. We'll introduce her in a minute. So rather than taking time to introduce our panels by their bios, they are in the program that you all have. So I really encourage you to read them. And before we begin, I would like to just have a moment of silence for Beverly Cotman, who is a beautiful soul, who has been a major force in this community for a long time. And she joined the ancestors last week while she was on vacation in Egypt. So let's just a brief moment for Beverly. And for her husband, Bill, who passed like 2 years ago. Yeah, thank you. That was really a loss for our community. So, More Than a Single Story always starts our public conversations with a poem based on the topic of the day's conversation. So, I am so pleased that today's poem will be delivered by Louis Alemayehu, who is another person who has been instrumental in starting and maintaining our beautiful community. And his bio is also in the program. So, Louis, please.
This makes me think of a story that goes back to the 80s, and there was a mixed group of us who belonged to something called the Twin Cities Committee for the Liberation of Southern Africa. And there was a brother from Zimbabwe who was a part of that group, and some of us African Americans asked him about how do we do spiritual work here? And his response like that was, you have to go through the indigenous people of this land. I had no idea what that meant. But in less than a year, I found myself at Prairie Island in sacred ceremony, in a nipi or sweat lodge. And I was there last night again. But eventually that led to me eventually working with my sister there, Juanita Espinosa, starting the Native Arts Circle. And that's just a hint of how things evolved in our community amongst so many of us from a variety of cultures. So my life right now is really focused on reclaiming indigeneity and trying to help people weave together a new culture. And it's around this idea. The Holy Land is all the earth. Sometimes I hardly know what to say in this high-tech dark age. And one day a sun will rise with healing in its wings, and loving dew will sparkle on our bare flesh, innocent, naked. Do you know the way from here to there, dear friend? Through the storm? Are the rocks still screaming? When I'm silent, really quiet, I hear voices. The Holy Land is all the earth, and all the earth is holy. The earth is our only home, creation, yes. All the earth is holy. The water holy, the air holy, the creatures that crawl, the creatures that swim, holy. The two-legged and winged holy. Let us touch with kind hands, blessing all that lives, all that laments. Rise, be robust and brave in the face of dawn. Face it, you are the face of dawn. Integrity of water, light, and love can sustain us now. This is the fire next time. Now, at last, real power. And the new world begins on this breath. Breathe. Now is the time, embracing in the silence of our after weeping, resting on the breast of our mother's sacred heart, beating, beating, beating.
Thank you, Lois. Now, introduce our moderator, Vickie Benson, whose bio is also in the program. But I would like to say that Vickie, for the last 30 years or more, has been creating equity for funding for our communities through the McKnight Foundation, through the Jerome Foundation, through the National Endowment for the Arts, through Grant Makers for the Arts, and I could say so much more about Vickie. I'm just really grateful to have her here today. Thank you. David, can you help me?
Thank you, Carolyn. Have a fancy microphone. You know, you folks, you friends, you might want to think about migrating that way, because I have a feeling that my wonderful stature is going to be in the way of you being able to. Anyway, just a suggestion. I am so honored to be with this distinguished group of artists and activists, revered, whom I have admired and respected for decades, their work, their presence, their activism. And I think it bears repeating their names, because I'm not sure, has this group been together giving, talking about your history? It's pretty amazing. So we have Kathryn Haddad, Juanita Corbine Espinosa, Daniel Pierce Bergin, Justiniano, David Mura, and Carolyn Holbrook. Wow. No bio could possibly cover all of the impacts, the work, the inspiration, the change making that these 6 folks have done and have given to our arts, our blessed arts and culture community and beyond. There's no bios that could cover any of those. So that's part of why we're here, as Carolyn said, so that you can hear their stories from their history, from the way they walked in the world as creators and makers and change makers within our arts and culture community. So how this is going to go today is they've been pondering, the 6 of them have been pondering questions, and I'm a coach now, so these are coach questions. But they've been pondering, and I'll tell you what they are, they've been pondering these questions from their experience and how they will share with you. And they will each speak, and then we'll have the opportunity to hear each of them reflect back on what their colleagues have said. And then there'll be an opportunity for you all to ask questions if you'd like, and there will be cards, or there are cards out there somewhere where you can write a question. And we'll, depending on the time, we will have our distinguished panel respond to those questions. Now, I'm going to be the timekeeper. I've asked them. I have great respect for these folks, but at some point, I might have to, just like say, time. I'll be softer than that. Then the next distinguished person will speak. So here are those questions that they've been walking with. From your vast experience, tell us what's important for you to share with current and future artists and activists. And also, what do you want more of? What do you want more of for the current and future arts community and beyond? So we're going to begin with my friend Al.
Can you hear me now? No. Can you hear me now? No. I feel like I got to do a commercial.
They're supposed to light up.
Hello? Oh. Oops. It's working now. Can you hold this? Hi, everybody. My name is Alberto Justiniano. Most people know me as Al, so I'm thrilled to be here. I'm putting my little watch here just in case. I hope it doesn't make
I got you, Al.
All right. Well, I'm with Teatro del Pueblo. It's a Latino theater located, Latinx theater located in the West Side, and I've been with it for many years. When I was pondering about this question, I was trying to figure out, how to answer it, because one of the things about me is I don't talk about myself a lot, but I think it's important. I've learned through the years. But what I like to do is tell you a little story so that'll put things in context. When I first started Teatro del Pueblo, it was two other artists. I wasn't an artist. My undergraduate degree is in math. And my graduate degree, many years after, is in filmmaking, but that's after I discovered the arts. But I didn't know anything about arts, and these guys asked me to help them out. And I'm like, okay. They were all complaining about not getting roles, and I decided, okay, let me help. And that's the one thing I learned in life. Help people, but also sometimes you can have to say no, right? But then again, I'm always trying to do that. So I did help them. But there was one thing that was very difficult for me, is the fact that I didn't know how to manage a theater or anything about arts. Well, how do you start a theater, right? But there was something important at that time, is how to get the IRS 503C, right? So I didn't know how to do it. But they looked at me like if I knew everything, right? So okay, I figured I went out and got the paperwork, and then I filled it out as best I can. And I always, till this time, I always think that it was some wonderful person on the other side that would correct it and send it back to me. Correct it and send it back to me. This happened 5 times before we got to the 501(c). And I didn't know, because we didn't have money for a lawyer. So those two things, helping others as well as trying to tackle things in the best way you can, and really looking at it as a challenge, but also looking for help. And I these people out in the IRS, they were nice people, and they helped me out. But that's one of the things I like to share, is that in my process of the 30 years that I've been with Teatro del Pueblo, many times I stop and say, should I continue? Should I not? Should I move on? But the fact that I became an artist, and the fact that it was community, always brought me back. But the one thing that I really learned about this is that you have to ask for help. That was a really important lesson that I have. Sometimes in the beginning, I didn't ask for help. I thought, asking people would be imposing on other people. But you'd be surprised how many people want to help you. Really, when you do it genuinely with humility and being grateful, they'll help you. And that's one of the other things that I wanted to tell you, is that sometimes, especially when you're young, you think you know it all. And the one thing that I learned is, the more I think I know it all, the more I need to learn. And it's one of the mantras that I live my life with, and I continue to learn from others. Because I don't know it all. And that has informed my art as well as how I, take a theater to the next level. So for me, that has been two of the main lessons that I've learned. So as I move on, as I continue with teatro, I realize that I still have to learn. And one of the things that I am is grateful for all those people who cleared the forest for me. And it's extremely important to be grateful. Sometimes we get caught up in our own world, and we really think, it's important to be not arrogant about that, to understand that you're one of many other people who strive to do these things, but you're one. And it's important to be grateful for all those who have helped you through the process and not forget. Because, we get busy, but it's important to really stop and put a priority to that. So those are the things that I think I like to share, especially as we move in a world that is so complicated. We're struggling, and it's gonna, get tough. And also, the fact that we're all human, and we'll make mistakes, and we'll have triumphs. But even it's important to take a moment and learn from your mistakes, and learn and really look at them as growing opportunities.
That's 1 minute.
So, my alarm's. I got 1 minute. So, I hope to share more later on, but I thought that I wanted to share those things because reflecting on this particular, a question, I struggle in the sense of to make sure that I gave back to others. And so thank you so much, and I'll pass the mic to the next person.
Carolyn.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay. So I have been creating and managing programs for the literary arts for almost 40 years, since 1981. First with the Whittier Writers Workshop, next with Sassy the Right Place, and now with More Than a Single Story. And my first venture at Whittier was in a community center that was connected to what is now Whittier School. And at that time, I was a recently divorced mother of 5 children to raise alone, and I'd always wanted to be a writer, and I just didn't have the means at that point to try to study. But the guy who was the director of the community center had a lot of arts programs going on at the park, and he himself was a performing artist. So I asked him if he would be willing to start a creative writing program. And he said, I'll tell you what, if you find someone to teach it, we'll do it. And I had just started a home-based secretarial service, when my kids and I were typing papers and blah, 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 blah. And my son, who was in 5th grade at the time, came home one day from school and said that there was a poet visiting his class. And he overheard her telling his teacher that she needed someone to type her manuscript. And so he invited her to come and talk to me, and she did. And I invited her to teach the class, and she did. Her name was Natalie Goldberg.
Natalie, yeah.
I typed her first poetry manuscript called Chicken and in Love. She's come a long way since then.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then she taught a 6-week class, and then she started introducing me to other teaching artists. And before I knew it, I had a full-blown creative writing program going in this community center. And the director was like, wow. Yeah, so he began sending me to classes at Resources and Counseling for the Arts, which is now Springboard for the Arts, to learn things about arts administration, which at that point I didn't even know was a field. So I was there for a number of years, till 1989, I think it was. After, my kids left home, they grew up, as kids do, they grow up and leave. And then at that point, I took a job here at the Loft as the first person of color in a leadership position. I was their program director. And during those 5 years that I was here, oh my goodness, whew. For any of you who've ever been the first You probably know what that means. You know, people invite you in, but they have no clue who you are, and that the way you think and the way you do things might be different than the established way of doing things. So it was just a constant battle. It was really, really hard. And I also felt pigeonholed by the members because, you know, as program director, back then they only needed one program director. Now our leader can probably tell you they got a few program people. But they only had one. So I was running the Loft McKnight program, I was running the Mentor Series, I was running all the Loft major programs, including one that David and several others had recently started right before I started, which was called the Inroads program, a program where they brought in, it was a program directed toward people of color. So it was, I'm telling you, it was crazy. No matter what I was doing, they'd see me on the stage, introducing famous writers, and they'd still tell me, oh, you run the Inroads program, don't you? I say, yeah, and all the others too. So, but after a while, it just got to me, so I just couldn't handle it anymore. So I stayed 5 years, and then I left. And when people in the community heard that I was leaving, I started getting all these calls. This was like way before email was a thing. It was becoming a thing. So it was more calls. People asking me if I was going to start another organization. And many of them were people who had participated in Whittier Writers Workshop, which we call W3, and at the Loft. And they kept saying, well, you know, you did that, and I think we need another program in the Twin Cities for writers. And I said, no, I'm never, ever going to do this again, ever. But as soon as I left, my energy came back. So I called some of those people back. You remember you were there for that meeting we had? Mm-hmm. And I said, y'all, if you want me to start another program, I need you to help me. And so a friend of mine who was running a process sort of organization agreed to do an ideation session to look at what a new organization for writers would look like.
Just a minute.
Oh man, are you kidding? Wow, okay. So we started Sassy. And I just tried to do what the guy at the park had done for me, which was, you know, he gave me all kinds of support. So when people came to me with ideas, I said, if you're serious, I will help you do it. Before we knew it, we had lots of programs going on, including a grants program that the Jerome Foundation funded, 2 grants programs. One of them was the Verve program, which was the first program in the nation for spoken word artists, and lots of other stuff that I guess I have like 30 seconds. Then, you know, I got
But
burnt
it's your
out.
show, you know, so.
Okay, I can take like a couple more seconds maybe. Yeah, so, you know, I had agreed internally within myself that I was going to stay at Sassy for 5 years. But 10 years later, I got so burned out. And so my board and I, and Sandy was involved in, Sandy Moore, and we just decided, you know, after some time to just merge Sassy with another organization so that our programs could remain viable and I could step away and write. And so we merged with Intermedia Arts, you know, which sadly is gone now. But, you know, my leaving to write was really a good thing to do. A few years later, I was invited to give a reading with some of the women in my Black Women's Writing Group, and one of the audience members said something like she couldn't believe that we were all so different. You know, because all black folks are the same, you know that, right? And I thought to myself, damn, if I ever get an opportunity, I'm going to do something about that. And sure enough, a few years later, I got an Arts Board grant, and part of that grant was that I had to do something in the community. And rather than just giving a reading, I wanted to do something meaningful. So I put together 3 panels, and my relationship with the Loft by then had been healed. And thankfully, Bao Fee and Sherry Fernandez-Williams, who were program people then, they encouraged me to have it here. So we ended up having 3 panels with Black women writers from the Caribbean, African American, and people from African backgrounds. And that has morphed into what we have now, 8 years later, with me and David doing the anthology that I talked about, and a bunch of other stuff, and I guess I better
No, it's
shut
really
up.
time.
Really, really
Really
time.
time. And we're,
Sorry,
thank you, though.
folks.
No, this is so, each one of these folks we could listen to them for all day.
Yeah, it's hard to distill 70 years into
Yeah, it is.
6 minutes.
It is. But next we'd love to hear from Kathy Haddad. We have a couple of duds, not the panelists.
I can talk really loud.
Testing.
There you go.
Testing. Okay, there we go. Don't talk. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm Kathryn Haddad, and I'm really honored to be here, especially among all these esteemed folks, some of whom have been my mentors. I've actually started many arts organizations in town, and led many arts organizations in town, and then moved on and started and led some other ones. Just in a nutshell, I'll kind of go over that, but I've actually written out some notes of advice, maybe a little different, that I've kind of feel like I was able to pull together from some of my experience. So I started out as a leader and organizer. I was the president of the local chapter of the Minnesota Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee in the early 90s, which I was nationally involved as well as locally. From there, I was one of the co-founders and the first executive director of Pangea World Theater. And then I co-founded and was the artistic and executive director of MISNA for, I think, 12 or 14 years. And then after that, currently I am the co-founder and artistic director of New Arab American Theater Works. And those are just some of the organizations I've helped found in terms of, many of them filing the paperwork, leading, kind of getting the first grants, in addition to being a part of lots of other organizations in town. So, and I'm a public school teacher as well. But I wanted to answer the question that Vickie had posed: what's important for current and future artist activists to share from your vast experience? And I've kind of come up with 4 bullet points that I wanted to quickly go through from my experience. The first one that I felt was really important as advice is to build coalitions with others, cross-generation coalitions, cross-ethnic coalitions, bridging genres. Maybe you're an arts group. Maybe you want to find a business that's like-minded, a grocery store, a restaurant, something completely outside the arts. And that has been my experience of gathering community together, especially the Arab American community that did not have a history in town of having arts organizations. There are many, many people in town who are interested in participating, have many skills and talents, but just didn't have a place to put them. So I found many, many people that I currently work with and have worked with for 20 or 30 years, even as actors, artists, writers, in those places, grocery stores, restaurants, other community spaces that aren't arts focused. People from our communities are not just, focused in the arts, or as I think Al mentioned as well, didn't study arts because of many different family and cultural reasons. We all have stories. I'm a storyteller. I'm a gatherer of stories. Every time we do an event, storytelling event, an artist event, a play, people from the audience will come up and say, I would love to tell my story. And it happens all the time, and always people who I will probe a little further, they've never written a story. They don't work in the arts. They, love storytelling at home, never had a place to do that. It's very motivational. It's a way to build coalition, to grow groups. The thing of warning is to giving in to pressure in your coalition building by building coalitions with oppressors and people that want to be in your coalition that maybe, that in your heart are not a part of your coalition, that might have nefarious reasons to be involved. And we do occasionally get that as well. So to be selective in coalition building has been my experience. Never give up. So when I started, and still till this day, there are many hurdles. There are many times when the odds seem insurmountable, when people don't recognize me, my community, what we do, just to keep going, and to try to not find your validation from the outside, which is difficult sometimes. As you've seen from my experience, sometimes the group that you created or with is not the right group for you at this moment. Not to say they've grown in one direction, you've grown in another direction. It's important to realize that, to cut your ties, to maintain, whatever relationships you have, and to move on to what you're passionate about at this time. To always move forward, but to recognize sometimes it's time to move on.
A minute.
Oh no. No. All right. Oh no. Oh gosh. All right. Step back when it feels right and create something new, or rest. Rest when things get rough. Sometimes people disappoint you. It's hard, but go on and trust yourself. My last advice, there are good people out there, everywhere. Have fun. Look to the ancestors. You think you might be doing something new, but you probably aren't. It's been done before. You have to figure that out. And I found out many times. I'm not the first, even though I think I am. Record your own stories and experiences. Don't expect or depend on others doing it for you. And recognize and honor those that came before you. One quick answer to what you want more of for current and future arts community. I have a list, but I'm gonna distill it to money. That's what we want more.
Money. Wow. Time.
Okay.
Perfect timing. Perfect timing. There'll be more time. We're doing really well, so that you'll be able to say some of the things that you didn't have time to say. But we want to turn to David Mura.
Reflecting on this panel, I feel like getting old partly is denial, and then something happens and you go, oh, I'm fucking old. So I looked at that sign, it says Loft 1974, and I realized that's when I came here. I remember Rousseau's bookstore when the Loft was started, and I was just like, oh my God, I am old. So back in the early 90s, people seemed to know only like 3 or 4 Asian American artists. There was Kinji Akagawa, Maria Chang, and myself. And I published my first book, and I started going to the West Coast, and I met all these great Asian American artists, and I wanted to bring them here. I met Valerie Lee, who was a community activist, and we started talking about having a conference. And suddenly people started talking to us and going, when are you going to have this conference? I don't know how the word got out, but it got out. We organized Asian American leaders, and the way you organize Asian Americans is you have a Asian American potluck. So we had a potluck for several months. We wrote grants, we had a conference, and then we had an organization. But my first point is, at the first conference, I'm asking the younger artists to set up chairs. And they're looking at me like, I'm an artist, I don't set up chairs. And I'm going, you're in the nonprofit arts world. That's what you do. You set up chairs, you put out the spring water, you put out the wine and cheese or the onigiri. That's what you do. If you want to live in a corporation, go live in a corporation. But that's what we're doing here. And it's this idea like there's this huge hierarchy and I don't do stuff, right? And activism, somebody's in this.
Did it go off?
Oh, yeah. So activism is not this thing where it's just the people on stage. You know, at the Million Man March, somebody got the park permit. Somebody, set up the audio equipment. Somebody fed people. And those are all acts of activism. And one of the things that has to happen in anything is money has to come in. And if somebody's not writing grants to make the money come in, and unfortunately that happened, I wrote grants in the first years of the Asian American Renaissance that we started, and then people stopped writing grants, and that's why the organization failed. So you need people who can keep the books, you need people who will write grants, you need people who will do the grunt work. Second thing is you have to create, you want to create a spirit where we're all supporting each other and we're handing things down, right? It's somebody taught me, I teach somebody else. Somebody gave me an opportunity, I work to give somebody else an opportunity. And we all become stronger then. And it's not about a competition, it's not about me, me, me. You celebrate somebody else's success. You don't spend time being jealous, because if they are successful, it helps the community. You don't do the crabs in the barrel thing, right? You have to respect the people who come before because they know things that you don't know, right? And it's also just a part of understanding that you're part of this whole cycle of life, right? Beverly, bless her heart, I loved her, you know, and she's passing on. And I don't know, hopefully not soon, but I'm going to pass on. And I want people coming after me, right, to carry on the legacy. The other thing is if you build an institution, the institution stays afterwards if people steward it in the right way. The other thing about building an institution is like, you know, Kathy came to us and said, you know, I don't know who I'm going to be a part of. You know, I'm a Lebanese American. We just said, okay, Asia extends all the way to the Mediterranean. You're an Asian American. And then Kathy went on to do all the wonderful work that she's done starting MISDA. And nobody would think that, you know, the first Arab American literary magazine would start here, just like the first Hmong literary magazine and organization, Pando Voice, was started by my name, Mura. And at the first conference that we had, Dong Ali and Rick Shiomi were talking on my front porch because we had a breakfast for everybody, and they started the idea for Theater Mu, right? And that's the way things start. And you build an institution, and the institution lasts beyond you, and it gives opportunities to other artists. What else did I want to say? So the other thing about activism is, in 92 or 93, Miss Saigon came out, we protested. In 1996, it came again, we protested. But what was interesting, by 2013 would come, we had a whole community of Asian American artists.
A minute.
And what we organized coalitions, and we organized according to the principles of the art of war and 48 laws of power. So if you're from a marginalized community, you need to read those books because you are in constant battle. And you know, one of the things is you need to know about your enemy. And one of the things we beat the Ordway and made them apologize and made them promise never to bring Miss Saigon, and we're the only community that's done it, is because we were incredibly organized. And somebody said, good will out as long as it's organized by the mafia. And we had spies in the organization. Theta Mu pretended to be neutral, you know, but was always working with us. And they freaked out because we knew funders, and we brought funders to a public meeting. They almost didn't want to see us because they knew, like, once we presented everything to the funders, they would go, oh, Jesus, you guys got a problem. So they thought they could bring it in because they ignored the advice of it. Two Asian American advisory communities to bring it in the first two times. Right? And I think they thought, we can do this again. And they didn't realize, like, the community had matured, we organized, we got politicians, we got the superintendent of St. Paul Schools to promise not to bring any kids to Miss Saigon. And frankly, they didn't know what hit them.
Time.
Right? So what this proves is we have power if we organize, we build coalitions, and you work according to the 48 laws of power and the art of war.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you, David. I was there. I'm glad I'm not a funder anymore. Although I have great respect for my funding colleagues.
Well, funders have become more and more enlightened as time has gone on.
Right. That's right. Thanks to you. And now turning to Juanita.
So I'm not going to do anything I'm supposed to do because that's just the nature.
Because that's Juanita. Yay.
So I'm going to read this because I have 7 minutes and I don't want you to miss any of
You
my
have 6.
6. Activism. The most important part is you got to, when you have a concern in activism, that you got to make your point clear so you have a focus. So in 1987 or so, I was in a community arts panel and was asked to encourage community art activity proposals from the Native community. Voila, they didn't come in, remember? That's why we were encouraging it. So there I was, and when we were reviewing these 5 fundable proposals that I had asked people to submit from the community, one of the members raised a question on the panel and said, should we be funding 5 Native proposals? Which then begged the question, were we funding on race or merit? So the point of this concern led to me asking, what were projects to be funded by race or merit? Should we probably still be these are probably still questions that should be for the funders. This concern led to an effort of me researching the issues and arriving at the questions of who is Indian, what is Indian art, who is working with, what does it mean working with sacred materials, and is there a need to address these kind of questions? A task force of Native artists and practitioners gathered for 9 months, and the Native Art Circle was born in policy laid out by a task force that set the foundation for how to operate. Designed to educate about Native art and build a support system for Native artists. The art service organizations are prolific in the area with a mission and an offering. But for us, somehow, they just didn't know how to approach or prepare artists and writers and performers to respond to these offerings. So we helped artists develop portfolios, and keeping in mind all the cultural norms that kept them from presenting themselves as artists while staying true to their cultural identity. So a big part of our questions and our life ways was all along that path. This was like years of work, and this was constantly teaching people to understand that first and foremost, we're thinking human beings. And if you're playing in that corner, and this is how you want people to play in that corner, we don't really want to play with you. We're trying to perpetuate what we do and not perpetuate what you do. So in Native culture, there is no word for art, so the difficulty comes in our community. How do you get people to understand that? How do we participate in these things, these constructs that exist, these organizational things that are out there? And then I worked on the Avenue. I came here in 1981. I was 23 years old. And in that idea, you would think that, I was going to learn all this stuff. So I went around to I was trained as a community organizer by the Saul Alinsky Institute out of the mid-town, country. And so, and Louis, my partner in crime, we went around the state and we asked everybody under the sun what they did. And so that led to us getting our own education about hearing what people had to say about that idea. And we were filled to the brim. I mean, we were flowing. We didn't know what the heck to do with what we were learning, because there were so many things that people wanted. And for a long time, I used to tease that I was just going to start a 1-800 Club, and just make money and forget it. And I could give the money away, and then people could do what they wanted to do, and there wouldn't be no IRS stuff happening, which of course I didn't do, which I wish I would have done, because people are already doing it. But I think that the most important thing in activism was that you have a concern and that you address it. Now, I lost that beautiful daughter that I had here in 2008. And that changed my world. So I didn't want to do any of this work anymore. I didn't want to perpetuate that. But out of my sorrow and my misery, the moment she left, I started making stuff. Every single day I made things. And every single day I worked with what I had. I didn't go ask for a grant. I didn't ask for help. I didn't do anything but pray and pray and pray and make stuff. And every time I made stuff, if I needed help, I'd give what I made and said, thank you for helping me. And I was grateful. So all of those things are part of activism. All those things are part of my choice of how I was going to address my concern. And my ability to live, because I had a family and I had a community that was depending on me. In the meantime, we decided to let Native Art Circle go. I should say I decided to let Native Art Circle go. So Native Art Circle was a wonderful organization that worked with artists in all genres, worked with people all over the country, the world, and internationally, trying to address the questions and the issues that continue to plague the Native communities that are trying to figure out a way to share an understanding of our culture. But keep in mind that each and every one of you, me included, are here to make life beautiful. As human beings, we're born to make life beautiful for each other.
1 minute.
For our families, for our children, for whatever the mother wanted us to do. She gave us all the gifts. They're all here. It's a matter of how we touch them and how we work with them and how we use them and how we interact with them. And we've chosen to take different routes a lot of times and have used that ability for us to see that beauty. So now in this generation, we're leaving that responsibility to a lot of our kids to clean the water, to clean the air, to clean things up, you know, to have a different way of looking at how to make life beautiful. And that's what I call the work I'm doing now, is just working with what I have. I call it, it's kind of based on this whole idea of recycling. So anytime you give me anything that you don't want, then I'm going to make something beautiful out of it. And that's pretty much what I've been doing.
Time.
But I did it.
You did it.
You see? Oh, you got it.
Hand the microphone over to Daniel.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, thank you all for coming. So what am I doing here? This is amazing to be on this panel. Carolyn said that I'm an elder baby with these elders. So the Zulu have a saying, there is an elder in this house. There are several elders in this house, so I'm honored to be a part of this. And I'm really honored to be a part of more than a single story. As a filmmaker and someone working in media, where narrative change is really central to the work that I have done and continue to try and do, that phrase is so important. The single story, which in the case of media and in the case of our communities has been literally lethal and destructive over the century and a quarter of moving image media, you know, beginning notably with A Birth of a Nation, you know, celebrating the Klan, recruiting the Klan, leading to lynchings. So, which Lena Smith, by the way, David, and other African Americans would protest when it would come to town and would literally get it prevented from screening. We don't like censorship, but we need, when literally it's a tool to recruit Klan members, we have to think about that. But so that idea of media and narrative is so important. It's really been the through line in my work. My work has also been kind of journalistic in nonfiction, documentary filmmaking. And I do think it was a New York Times journalist who said, our role is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And so with a film like Jim Crow of the North, you know, that's the idea, is to kind of acknowledge the real history of discrimination in a place like Minnesota that's very real, not even de facto segregation, but we learn is real. And also to affirm, especially for African American elders and other people of color who, you know, the narrative was there's something wrong, it's just you, it's your community, but no, in fact, the game was rigged. And so if that's comforting the afflicted, that's that piece of it. But ultimately my work and what I would direct young people and do, and because I go teacher mode on them, and I think they roll their eyes a little bit, but it is that idea of Gordon Parks. You know, he really is the North Star for me and my work, and I'm a part of a community, I think a broader community of disciples of Gordon Parks, the great film pioneer, photography pioneer, who, you know, really captures what I think a lot of us do in our work, and it's that idea, as he said, of a choice of weapons. That idea of using kind of the life weapons, creative expression to fight poverty and bigotry and other things that he saw and that he kind of pointed his lens at. So that's really been kind of the driving force in my work as a filmmaker. Interestingly, and I think we all have this experience to some degree, but I'm the brother who's been in the white institution for decades at Twin Cities PBS. And so that's been an interesting role. And it, you know, I kind of am hearing of these awesome, you know, people of color-led organizations that you all have built, and you've had to navigate that white space too in terms of funding and allies and others. But, you know, so for me and those of us like the late Robert Byrd, who hired me at Twin Cities PBS as a production assistant, that experience has been a part of the, you know, that creative endeavor, is to, you know, work in that restorative narrative way of, you know, kind of affirming us and our communities and kind of dragging along the organization sometimes in the process. You know, just a quick, I was thinking about Robert, and I was thinking about when I first started my work in Twin Cities PBS and in documentary work. And so Robert sent me to the north side to get some footage as he directed me. So off I went with the crew, and, you know, was, I think, trying to get into a barbershop on West Broadway. And, you know, the proprietors were rightly like, no, we don't do media or the news. Sorry. And so I, really took that in and kind of knew where that was coming from. Again, Birth of a Nation and a century of a single story, pretty much. And really had worked then to try and build that trust for this documentary and nonfiction work that we were doing in PBS. And I was proud that later, a few years later, I would be, and my crew would be, the only kind of news crew or media crew welcomed into some of our spaces in difficult times in our community. But that building of trust is important. That's something Gordon talks about before he would click the shutter. It really was about building and establishing a rapport with your subjects, that there's a power, and it can be a destructive power too, in media and lens media and film and television, and kind of honoring that. So in a way, it's interesting because Lewis is like a griot, like in the real sense. It's so powerful to kind of have that in our community. And I'm kind of like an electronic griot or something. I don't know what I would call it as a filmmaker.
A minute.
Thank you. And I'm kind of reticent by nature. And so my journey has been amazing just because it's allowed me as a storyteller to kind of enter into space, to meet Juanita doing a story about her Two Rivers Film Festival 25 years ago, or recently to work with David on an important documentary that he wrote about Japanese Americans and kind of winning World War II. So that idea then of breaking that single story is been constant in my work, and doing it with Gordon Parks' idea of a choice of weapons kind of continues to inform me, and I hope for other people, young people coming up in media, which is ubiquitous now. And I've got 2 teenage daughters. There's no shortage of media, but for them, for young women of color, it's as dangerous and literally as deadly as it ever has been, even including Birth of a Nation. And so the importance of knowing how to wield that weapon of choice has never been more crucial.
Time. Thank you, Daniel, for bringing Robert Byrd into the room. Dear Robert. So you've all listened to each other, and now have an opportunity, if you want, to reflect on what you've heard or to add to, because the timekeeper cut you off too quickly. Maybe you want to say something else. And it looks like David would love to say something. And David, true to my new skill here, I'm going to tell you when 2 minutes has passed.
I just want to thank Daniel for backing Armed with Language, because these were the Japanese American linguists who studied Japanese at Fort Snelling, went out to the Pacific to work as battlefield translators, interrogators, and translators of captured documents and messages. And many of these men were recruited from the concentration camps and the Japanese internment camps. And MacArthur's chief of intelligence, General Willoughby, said that they shortened the war in the Pacific by 2 years and saved 1 million American lives. Which means that there are anti-Asian, anti-immigrant white people alive today because these Japanese Americans helped save their fathers or grandfathers. And it's an argument for diversity. Secondly, when he was saying, like, traditions of art, part of it, I think, for communities of color is just give people opportunities. We held a cabaret and we just let anybody do whatever. And we said, well, what is Asian American art? And we didn't care. It's like, if you want to get up and dance a polka, get up and dance a polka. If you want to do a comedy routine, do a comedy routine. And suddenly, we went from like 3 or 4 artists, Asian American artists, to the point where we did a booklet a few years after, and we had about 100 Asian American artists. It's the same thing when I helped start the Writers of Color class here at the Loft, because they had never filled a class of 12 for Writers of Color. And I said, you have to do it differently. So what we did is we held organizational meetings in the North Side, at the Hmong Art Center, in the South Side. We got people from the community to publicize it. And I said, I want to do it in the main hall. and I want to have 100 people. Well, 145 people signed up. In first class, we had 85 people. So when organizations say, you know, there are no people of color, it's just nonsense. It's just you have to do things differently to reach people of color.
Time.
Okay, I'm going to go on for just a second.
Great.
So when Miss Saigon came out, I wrote an article about arguing with white friends about yellow face casting in Mother Jones. And at the time, I was arguing with white artist friends about this. And I lost probably all of my white artist friends then. And I got very depressed, but the thing that taught me is after that, I was never afraid of pissing white people off. And the thing is, none of those people would get on stage today and defend yellowface casting. So remember, if you're an artist of color, you're looking to the future. Part of your audience is in the future, it's not in the present. And if the mainstream doesn't understand what you're doing, history is on your side. Because, as I say in my book out there, you know, black people have been on the right side of our racial history at every point in our racial history. The majority of white people have been wrong, but white people have never turned to black people and said, you know, we got it wrong every single time in our history. Now we're going to listen to you. And when that happens, we'll know we have a different country.
I'm listening to you, David, and we just threw out the rules. So, who wants to?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I wanted to say is really that each generation has to handle how they themselves as they see fit. So you really got to listen to people around you. I mean, so often I think, you know, you get a mic and you get to talk, so no one hears you but the person on the mic, and then you go away. So the point being that history is a source of knowledge. It's a way to listen to how one uses policy. You have to understand your allies and how you work with them to inform your plan. So listening is good. It can be useful. When I was starting to do the work, I spoke to the Asian American potluck, you know, and told them, look this is what I've been trying to do, and it's not easy, you know. For example, one of the organizations, which I guess it won't matter what I say about it, but is that when they said there's only one native playwright that could come. I mean, there's the only one in the country that we know of. And I said, well, wait a minute. So what do you need? And they said, well, we've been asking for scripts, but we never get any from natives. And I said, well, give me a minute, you know. So I took a postcard, sent it out, and within 2 weeks I brought in 16 different kinds of scripts to the Playwright Center, and the Many Voices program was reborn because it finally had people from the native.
That's it.
There's always more to say in this audience, but I'm not sure. I wanted to make those 2 points.
That's a great point. Who else?
Kathy, you said something that's really important creatively, as creatives, and that idea of there's nothing new under the sun, you know, that we're always kind of, in a creative sense, considering that. But one of the themes that I'm hearing from you all is, you know, it's Sankofa, right? Looking back to reclaim what we have lost, maybe, but not always. And that these models that you have built in creating culturally nuanced theater and alliances, and Carolyn, even you bringing us together like this, that, to me, that's really powerful. Being in what's probably unique in the nation, right? A Center for Book Arts. It's just, this is rare, and we're kind of fortunate in this community to have some of those opportunities, but just looking to those examples of Asian American Renaissance being incubated at an Intermedia Arts, which grew out of UC Video, where I was a student. Right, like, I mean, that idea of really, how did you do it? And some of you are responding to that today. But the call to young people is, you have to ask the elders, how did you do it? How did you build this amazing arts community that's diverse, that's led by us? How did that come to be? And so I think that's there's nothing new under the sun piece of that, is that we've got some amazing examples to learn from.
Thank you. Kathy, Al, Carolyn, any last, before we turn to questions, any last reflections?
You know,
Some funder has to give the Loft some new microphones.
One of the things that struck me I think a couple people mentioned this, is that sometimes you have to realize that you have to, as an artist, you do your art and you work on your art, and it's not working again, but I'll be loud because I'm from
Kathy has one.
There we go. You do your art, and you inspire other people to do their art. It's important to really not find ways to help others. It's so important, especially building cross-cultural engagement. One of the things that I always think, and at least I try to bring this to Teatro del Pueblo, is the fact that you can't assume things about other communities that are, even your own community, that you have to find opportunities to cross-engage other communities. As the demographics change in our nation and all over the world, it's important for leadership will be turning, and it's important for us as community of colors to be able to engage and understand the needs of other communities, not only our community. And it's important to create work and also to reach out to those communities. One of the things that I mean, when we talk about cross-pollination and how we all connected, I know that Diana Espaldon was there when we started Teatro del Pueblo, and I was connected to her when she was starting. We started at the same time. We used to go to similar meetings. When Theater Mu was being born and Teatro del Pueblo, we were born in the same year. So we talked and all that. So it was great connecting with Diana Espaldon and some of the people from Mu. But also, as we engage in our work, it's also important to know that we need to look back, and I think this is resounding, that you need to look and pass on some knowledge and really help those. Not only, sometimes people assume that leadership is about only leading, but leadership also is about following. You have to learn how to follow and support other people, because when they grow and they come to term to lead, that's you also. So it's extremely important to lead and also let lead and follow. So I think we put too much emphasis on the leading and not on the following. And good leaders cannot accomplish things if they don't have followers.
True. I think Kathy, if you pass that down to Kathy. And if you have questions, pass them to the middle, please.
So I ended my my little talk on kind of seemed sort of funny with my thing that the only thing I said was money that we need. But I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because I think that the funding community is changing a bit now, but it still needs to change more. All of us sitting here have probably been working for decades with practically no funding or very minimal funding, and accomplished great things. And we look around our town and the big arts institutions, the Guthrie, the Walker, whatever, are largely led and run and serve the white community. And our organizations deserve to have spaces that are like that as well. We deserve to have our personnel paid at a fair and comparable rate, our artists to be paid, to have facilities to do our work. All of these things are something that we really do deserve, and this is one thing that I feel, like I said, has changed a bit in the last few years, maybe with some money being going out, but needs to change more. And so I just wanted to really make that clear, especially for people that might not be involved in the arts, that there's been a lot of scrapping that we've had to do as communities of color to get our work out there. And there's been a lot of unjust happenings in terms of funding over the years, and that really needs to change.
Thank you. And Carolyn.
Yeah, I'm sort of the quiet one in the room. And I'm just sort of listening to what everyone is saying and just being so grateful that we're all here together and getting this knowledge out to, you know, the folks in the audience, and it's being recorded and it will be on our website. And I'm just really, really excited about this conversation. Thank you. I don't think I could add anything because everybody has said everything that's in my heart.
Thank you. Before we turn to questions, I'd just love to. Are there questions floating out there that haven't come up front here yet? Okay. For anyone to answer, how do you build trust in yourself?
For me, it's been about just knowing that, or believing that, you know, whatever vision I had was something that needed to happen. You know, my son, I have two sons, and one of them said to me one time, Mom, you're just out there trying to be famous. And, you know, I'm probably the most introverted person in this room. And I just knew that I had to do these things that I was doing. And then I turned around and saw that people were following me. So I was like, oh, I guess I should trust that my vision has legs.
Yeah.
In my book, The Stories Whiteness Tells Itself, I define whiteness as a set of beliefs, ideas, rules, and practices which establish white supremacy and continue its maintenance in our society. And what I tell younger artists of color is and that whiteness infects us, infects our psyches, you know, shapes how we think about ourselves. And so what you have to do is make whiteness a smaller and smaller and smaller voice in your head. So its evaluation of you does not touch your knowledge of who you are. Second thing, because of whiteness, you're going to receive all sorts of negative messages, negative stereotypes about yourself, and you have to root those things out. And one of the ways and you can't just root it out, you have to replace it with positive messages. And sometimes the messages aren't coming from the culture. Sometimes they come from writers and artists, and that's great, but sometimes you just have to say stuff to yourself. And I stay this version of, I don't know if you remember Stuart Smalley, who would say on SNL, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, I'm handsome enough, you know. And it sounds stupid, but because it's very hard for me to look at myself in the mirror and not think there's something wrong with the way I look. And I say to myself, I look in the mirror sometimes and I just say positive things to myself, because that's the other way you make whiteness smaller inside your head.
Thank you. There's a theme in a couple of the questions. Let me see if I can synthesize. Do you have advice on how to prevent infighting within our own communities as we navigate generational trauma and systemic racism? It sometimes breeds mistrust within communities of color, especially.
Hello? That's a very good question. One of the things that I always think and I come back to is the key word of love. The word really, it's about sacrifice. You really develop love and trust, which comes after that, is by helping others in a way that works for them. And developing and going out of your way to make sure you lift them and connect with them, even if they disagree completely with you. Once you come to that level of trust, which is done by sacrifice, because love without sacrifice is really easy to do, right? So that's very important, that in order to develop relationship intracultural, You need to look at what the other person really likes and wants to do. And really, even if it's not your cup of tea, it's go there and help them, selfless, in a way that you understand that it's going to be a sacrifice. But there, you develop a trust. And hopefully that person is not arrogant and think, oh, they helped me because my stuff is better. But they will help you, come back and help you. And that's how you build, well, in my estimation, is how you build trust. And trust is the most important part of a relationship, as you build the relationship. But in order to do that, you have to put in some work. And there has to be the first one to start. So I know in many communities there has been, and I've been in tables and meetings where there is mistrust among communities. And we're human. So we have to go to the human values, which is how to develop that trust. And trust comes with sacrifice. Not thinking about yourself, but thinking about the other person and what's important to them, and trying to lift them up, and within that context, be able to talk to them about what their challenges are and why you think the way you think, and for us, and for both to be able to listen to each other.
Thank you, Al. And Daniel, are you?
Yeah, because this operating in scarcity is one of the ways that we're divided and conquered. And I don't know exactly how you all did it, but again, the power of story. When you know someone's story, you can't harm them, is the African proverb or the proverb. But the stories of collaboration, that AIM is founded in Minneapolis in conversation with Black activists on the north side, that there's that symbiosis even at that point, that Asian American Renaissance had Black and Asian artists working with Black and Asian youth at Penumbra on media and theater to kind of deal with tensions in the Rondo, Selby-Dale community. Those stories are there. I feel like, to answer the question, just looking back and seeing instances of when we have worked together, because we have. And so I don't know how it came together that Valerie figured out that, and her and Lou and Sarah made that cool collaboration, but it happened and I was a part of it. And so I just think that power of story, of seeing when we've collaborated is important.
Yeah, with the development of Native Art Circle, and actually a lot of the work I've done is that you have to hear that story. And one of the sort of proverbs of our work was that we had to agree to disagree, because there's so many questions about who is Indian, what is Indian art, what does it mean to work with sacred materials, that need to be heard and need to be understood from our own community in order to tell that story of how it came to be and why it's even a question. So that being said, that's how we did it. And at the end of 9 months, we actually came to fruition and have really strong policies to operate from in terms of how to get people to move forward. And many times it's, you need to talk to somebody, you need to talk to an elder, you need to talk to someone that will hear you out and hear what you need to say. And those are kind of, and give you validation if that's what you need, and that was kind of our way of trying to figure out how to address it without addressing it, because it wasn't, how do you say, it wasn't our fight, they needed to deal with it with someone else, and it wasn't like we wanted them to go to counseling, but we wanted them to figure out how to articulate their issues so that someone else could help them that knew how to listen to what they needed. But those were sort of internal. I don't know if they were so much external. And certainly, I think, AIM is a big example of a lot of fights, and I've worked with every one of them. So I worked with all the leadership, and, we came out of an era when everyone wants to talk about how great our men were, but we really know that it was great women that made AIM what AIM is today. So that being said, I don't need to say anymore.
Thank you, Juanita. So that we can get to the reception and have you all communion with each other, there is, I'm going to combine two questions here, and I hope to hear at least something from each one of you. And this is to go back to Kathy's list about money, that you said that was important, that had to be flowing. Besides money, what do you need? Or if you had the money, what would you do? That's part of the question. And then a little bit of a twist on it is, aside from money, what is the most important role a funder can play? Funder. Anyone want to jump in? Kathy, maybe?
You asked the question.
Well, I mean, if it's a funder, I think they should give money. I mean, that's their role.
Sorry.
But what was the question again? Besides money, what?
If you let's switch it a little bit. If you had the money, what would you do?
Right. Well, personally, as my own arts organization, or just in general, what I feel for the arts community. Well, I guess just what I had said earlier. I think we need to have our artists fairly compensated. We need to be able to run our arts organizations in such a way that administrators are able to do their job and they don't have to do 2 or 3 other jobs on the side, which a lot of arts organizations, that's what happened. They should have space to do their work where they're not always trying to go around and find a place to do their work. They should have access to all of the electronic means, whatever you need for your work. I mean, I think it's the same that, like, you would think another non-BIPOC arts organization would need the resources in order to compensate everyone fairly and to produce their work. I don't think it's anything besides that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything?
I always say money's the root of all evil, so
Okay.
buy me a meal or something. I don't know.
Okay.
You know, buy me a car. I don't know. Today I need a car. Tomorrow I might need something else. But no, I think, you know, when you start talking about money and funders, it's sort of like, that's such a, you know, the issue I always have with the art is that it like you have to use your little finger and it becomes something different. And it's really a struggle for me to deal with the money piece of it because, you know, I've been in situations where people wanted to give me money and I didn't want their money because they came with expectations that I didn't want to fulfill. So maybe maybe a request for something that, you know, what do I want to do or what do we want to do with the money, and
no
let us be
strings.
real.
No
Yeah,
strings.
no strings.
I'll just add, David, this is a time to plug Alex Pate's Multiculti Boho Sideshow book. If you haven't read it, that speaks to this in a moment in time. But I would. A little bit of thunder is murder. And some of it's very close to home with some of the organizations that you know. But I would just look to, I mean, when we have us in the foundations and in the giving spaces, leaders of color who are connected to community. I'm pointing at Arlita because you were that, and you know that to me is one way that, and it's kind of sublime, right? It's not that kind of high thinking. It's like it can't be a by us and about us without us, and that's the same in philanthropy.
One of the things, you know, we always love money, right? I mean, well, to a degree it's for our organizations because we want to lift them up and money helps. But really, the main question is how do we change philanthropy so that it's more equitable? And that is something that has to be more of a, an effort to help those within the foundations to get to the powers, which are the trustees, the people. We make assumptions that the program officers are the ones who have the power. They have some leeway into this, but it's not the full power there. And then we need to join them. And many of them, especially when we have people from our communities part of these foundations, is to help them find ways to get to that trustees and change their minds of how to make philanthropy more equitable in our communities as well as nationally. So I see it more as a strategic balance and a collaboration with funders, program officers especially, to be able to get to those funders, to that strata where the funders are the people who have the power. I've sat in conversations where one person who knows another person can ask a foundation for funding and things happen. But that power is something that we need to in all our communities, and to be able to get access to that so that our communities are able to be better served. But ultimately, sometimes a one-up is not going to do it. We really need to really help change the system. And to do that, you have to be part of the solution, and it's really helping those, the people who have some leverage in there, to help them and prop them up so that they can really help us to get to the ears of the people who are the movers and shakers.
Thank you. David?
I've sat on the board of VONA since 2016, and I've been writing grants for VONA. And one of the things, what I think is good in the last few years is
Will
arts.
you tell folks, in case they don't know what VONA is?
VONA is Voices of the Nation Arts Foundation. It's a conference for writers of color, and it was founded on the idea that writers of color experience so much racism, so much ignorance, so much ignorant criticism in white-dominated workshops, that they needed a different experience where they were taught by writers of color. And we have taught over 2,600 writers in our 20 years. Over 450 of them have published books and won prizes, including people like Maurice Collis-Ruffin, Tiari Jones, Denez Smith, and what it shows is that if you have an organization like that, it creates a whole different type of education. But we have been struggling throughout our organization to get funds, and I'm writing grants. It's not my job, and I'm competing against organizations where they have paid development officers, right? And there are certain skills. I mean, we're an artist board. We don't necessarily have accounting skills, and so I think helping to teach organizational skills would be part of it. Also, helping smaller organizations to know where funding and contact them rather than us contacting them, because I have to research the internet for grants that we might be eligible, and I don't do this for a profession, right? And so I'm competing again against people who do it for a profession and who know this stuff. I don't know this stuff. I can write grants because I'm a writer. I write very good grants. But the technical expertise oftentimes for running an organization is very hard to find in a community, especially in a nonprofit arts community, and especially in an organization where much of the effort may be done by volunteer effort in these smaller organizations. So I think there's a vast amount of stuff that foundations could provide in terms of just understanding the perspective of smaller nonprofit arts organizations from marginalized communities.
Thank you, David. And Carolyn, last note on this question.
If I had a wish for funders, it would be that they listen to us. We know what we need. You don't. You make your rules around what you think we need, and that is not, that just ain't right. So if we need, some sort of organizational development type kind of thing like what David is talking about, some foundations do offer that. They'll give you $2,000. $2,000. When you need help to learn how to do the things that David is talking about. You need help to, to have people on your team who, can understand the businessy type of stuff that's going to keep you alive. And we also need, as everyone else has said here, we need enough funding to keep our staff from having to do 2 or 3 jobs at once. You know, I mean, my goodness, we have families. We need to eat. We need to pay rent. We need, you know, we all want to pay artists, and we do pay artists, but I don't want to starve while I'm paying my artists. So please listen to us and give us what we really need.
Thank you, Carolyn. So all of the questions didn't get forwarded, but I will make sure that Carolyn has them. And we are going to, unless our panel has, I shouldn't make the last comment unless there's last comment for the good of the order. I don't see. I would like you to, I'm going to say each person's name because these are important names. And as I said, as we all said, these folks have made such huge impact in our world and our lives that they, let's respect them. Thank you, Kathryn Haddad. Thank you, Juanita Corbine Espinosa. Thank you, Daniel Pierce Bergin. Thank you, Al Justiniano. Thank you, David Mura. And thank you very much, Carolyn Holbrook. So important, there are evaluation forms that funders make the Loft fill out. So, and it's really important. They get a lot of information from the evaluation forms. And so if you would actually take a few minutes to fill those out. I think they're out in the lobby. Is that right, Arlita? And any last words from our leader, Carolyn?
Thank you, Vickie, Benson.
There is a reception, am I right about that? Is that correct? Out in the, you're all invited. There are books to be purchased, and please purchase the books. And the authors are here. I don't know, are you gonna sign? They'll sign, they will sign. So thank you very much for coming.